Hi, I'm Sharon Sutherland. I'm here with my colleague Wendy Lakusta and our guest Rebeka Breder. And we're here to talk about strata disputes, but this time we've invited Rebeka, who is both an animal law specialist and a litigator, to talk about how animals come up in strata disputes. So Rebeka, do you want to just start us off with kind of the general question of just how do animals come up in strata disputes?
Well, some of the more general problems that often come up, first of all, involve dogs. Okay. Sometimes cats, but they're mainly dogs. And some of the key issues are noise, breed. Some people don't like the type of breed the dog is, or the strata complains that it doesn't that the breed doesn't conform with its strata bylaws. The size of the dog, sometimes the dog is too big, and again, there are certain strata bylaws that prohibit certain sizes of dogs. And then there are also welfare concerns, people concerned about the well-being of, again, it's usually a dog. Yeah, and I mean, just to elaborate a little bit on that, when it comes to welfare, people often see the dog chained outside if it's a downstairs patio, or left outside on a balcony if it's a unit that's on the upper levels of the building, and they don't see any food or water or not enough shelter if it's sunny out. And those can be quite serious concerns, especially if the dog is outside for a very long time. And then the noise, well, if it's a yappy dog that's quite loud, and especially if the building isn't completely soundproof, it could get pretty frustrating for a lot of strata owners and residents.
Yeah. So say I'm a dog owner and I get a complaint about my little fur baby. What steps should I take? Like, what would you recommend?
So if you're an owner and you're dealing with someone else's dog in another strata unit, first of all, very often these types of disputes arise in the hallway. Right. Whether it's two dogs encountering each other in the hallway, or if it's one owner of the unit who knows that the other dog from another unit is the one causing the noise problems, people often first try and talk to each other, and that's actually the very first thing that I would recommend is to try and talk to the other owner first before anything, before you put anything down in writing. Just talk to the other owner and just get their side of the story. Kind of very basic, common
complaints
sense.
Process, kind of.
Yeah. And really, it could be tough because these could get very emotional. People could get very emotional on both sides. So the person complaining and the one receiving the complaint. But really just try and talk it out to see if you could resolve it that way.
Right.
And then the next step I would suggest is writing to, if you're an owner that's complaining about a dog, usually a dog again, in another unit, then just write to the other owner and tell them in writing what your complaint is. And then see if you could work it out that way. What I would say, though, is the starting point is if it is a welfare concern, if you are concerned about the welfare of the other animal, and again, it's usually a dog, call the SPCA because they are the only ones in British Columbia with the power to investigate cruelty to animals. So hopefully they are very strapped for resources, but they do what they can. So if it is a welfare concern, then definitely the first thing you should do before even talking to the other owner is call the SPCA if it's serious enough, if you think it's serious enough. The other thing that I would say is that if it is a noise complaint, people often pick up the phone and want to call the bylaw department of the city that they live in to complain to them about the noise level.
Right.
That's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but what I would caution people is that there could be very serious consequences or implications of flow from that. And specifically, if there's a complaint that a bylaw department receives, they open up a file, about that dog, and I could tell you, the dog is now on the bad list. And if something else were to happen with that dog, and it could be something very minor, it could potentially give an animal control officer the grounds to seize that dog. Right. So very often people don't realize that just a phone call to the city bylaw department could, in theory, and it does happen, lead to the actual seizure of the dog. So if you do want to call the bylaw department, just know that there could be some serious consequences, unintended consequences.
Yeah. That's good information.
It is.
Know, yeah.
Well, and it also sounds like maybe it would make more sense to look at what there is within the strata, because I know you're talking about sending the letter to the other owner. Presumably the strata has other kinds of options too if owners aren't able to work it out between themselves.
Yeah, so then if the owners can't work it out between themselves, then the next step is often getting the strata involved, because in British Columbia, stratas do have an obligation to enforce their own bylaws, and almost all stratas have bylaws governing pets, if they allow pets in the building, that is. Or even, mind you, even if they don't allow pets, then there's a bylaw that prohibits pets. But the strata does and can get involved in these types of disputes. And then in that case, one of the first things is the strata, one of the strata council members can speak to the owner. So again, it starts by talking. And can start by talking, and I would say it should start by talking to see if you could resolve it that way before anything is put down in writing, because people are often scared about putting anything down in writing, and if you could avoid doing that, then I would suggest just trying working it out in person. And then if that doesn't work, then the strata often sends a letter. It's either a warning letter or it's a letter issuing a fine.
And is that through the property manager normally? Or does it come directly from strata to the owner?
Yeah, it's generally through the strata property manager.
Right.
Yeah, who gets instructions from the strata council.
Okay.
And technically under our Strata Property Act in BC, that's the way it should be done.
Right.
But sometimes, it's a strata, depending on how small the strata complex is, a strata council member can just approach the owner of the dog, again, usually a dog owner, and just say, hey, we've received a complaint, can you do something about it? Whether it's a noise complaint or being off leash on the property when it should be on leash. So so it starts off by
simple conversation.
Yeah.
And
followed up with a letter, either just a warning or imposing a fine.
Okay. So assuming now we've been talking as though this was somebody else's dog. If it's your dog that there's some kind of complaint about, and let's say for whatever reason people haven't approached you, they haven't taken that advice and gone and come and said, hey, here's the problem, and instead you've got a complaint and you've received this notice from the strata saying here, or it's a fine. What do you do in those circumstances as an owner?
Well, again, that's a really good question. And the first thing that I would do is call the strata property manager, because it's usually a letter from the strata property manager, and try to get some more information. What is the complaint really about? Because often these letters just say, we have received a complaint about your dog. Pursuant to bylaw so-and-so, you must do the following. So it doesn't really give the owner a good idea of what the complaint really is about. So there's nothing wrong with asking the strata property manager, hey, can you tell me, is it the person just doesn't like dogs, or they're allergic to dogs and they just don't like mine? Like, what's really going on behind the scenes? Right. Very often people want to know who's the one who made the complaint, because I want to talk to them. And it's confidential information. The strata property manager can't give that information, at least not at the beginning. And it's probably the right thing too, because you want to avoid a confrontation and stress between neighbors as much as you can.
Right.
Okay.
You want to keep it de-escalated for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that you'd mentioned about maybe a council member coming and talking and having that kind of conversation, I mean, that's sort of inserting a third party into the discussion. And I guess just coming from the mediation area, we're sort of, I think Wendy and I have both seen a bunch of different kinds of disputes around animals coming through mediation. So mediation isn't used much in stratas. I'm kind of just going to ask, like, are there other ways or approaches to engage a third party, get that other person in to change the dynamic of that discussion?
Yeah, well, I think there should be someone like a mediator or a third party involved, someone who's objective, because in these types of cases, and I'm sure you've seen it, it can get very emotional between the two owners or between the two residents. And so you want someone who can come in and sit down, even if it's in the building, and it sometimes it is, in a conference of the strata, in a conference room of the strata complex. Just sit down with a third party and talk it out. I mean, it's really as basic and as simple as that. Just getting someone who both people should obviously agree to that one person, and trying to talk it out. So there's definitely opportunity to do that. The other thing I would suggest is, before meeting with that third person, is for both sides, if you know that you're about to meet with a third person, is to just write down for yourself kind of your version of events of what happened, because that gives you the opportunity to express in writing to yourself what happened, and it also gives you time to kind of calm down and mellow down, because as an owner who receives a complaint, you could get very frustrated about, well, my dog didn't do anything wrong, or I shouldn't be treated like this, and you want to vent that all out in writing to yourself before actually meeting with the third person. And I would actually give that type of advice regardless, you know, whether before you approach the other owner or before you start talking to the strata, is just write it down to yourself, just to kind of vent out those frustrations.
Good advice, yeah.
Yeah, the venting, and also maybe venting and then translating it into something that is more neutral language, so that you've actually practiced for how you're going to put it with the other person too.
Yes, exactly. And it really does give you a chance to just articulate in your own way how you feel about what happened.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that sounds like all great advice, Rebeka, and I just want to say thank you for coming out and sharing it with us. I know there's just so much to talk about with animals and stratas.
Yes, lots. We could go lots. Well, thank you very much. And
It's
absolutely
been great.
My pleasure.
Great.